I had one guy that told me that he would give me $50,000 and I could start. And so I started, and I had a crew 3 or 4 days in, and I get a call from the guy who's supposed to put up the money, who hadn't put it up yet. And he says, hey, my wife just filed for divorce. You're probably going to get a call from her attorney, and I'm not going to be able to put up the money. And now I got these crews out like on the road, and I'm sweating and, like nervous. And strangely, I walked into a coffee shop, a Panera Bread where I lived, and I must have shown it on my face, and this guy's that I've met twice in my life says, are you okay? And I said, man, I'm really stressed out. And I told him what had happened, and he was like, well, I think everything's going to be fine. And the next day he wired $50,000 into my bank account and said, I've been saving this money. I didn't know what it was for, but I think this is the right thing. So make a movie. And that's how it got. He was just that crazy.
The guy at Panera Bread sent you $50,000?
Yeah. The guy I'd met twice in my whole life. And his last name is Cash. My name is Thomas Morgan. I am a filmmaker.
And Thomas, can you tell us a little bit of how you got into the industry?
Yeah, I didn't get into it the traditional way. I never went to film school. I always wanted to be in film. I kind of studied strangely like on my own and was fascinated with it. But my father always said, people like us don't do things like that. So I grew up in a very blue-collar town where most of the town went and made a left to go to work at General Motors, or a right to go to work at Oldsmobile. So college was even a stretch for most of the kids where I grew up. So, most of my career, I was in business and real estate development, and always messed around with film more as a hobby than anything else. And then I just had this really chance meeting at an event that I got invited to, and I was telling this guy, he asked me if I was in the business, and I said no. I said, but somebody should make a film about homelessness in the United States. And he said, well, why don't you do it? And I had a couple of drinks, and I was like, yeah, maybe, I don't know, and I said, how about you? Are you in the business? He said, yeah. I said, what do you do? He said, I'm a documentary filmmaker. And I said, anything I would have heard of? And he's like, yeah, Supersize Me. So Morgan Spurlock was telling me to get into this and to try it. And then Susan Sarandon walked over, and Morgan Spurlock said to Susan, hey, Thomas is going to make a documentary on homelessness in the United States. And she said, how do I help you? And I jokingly said, well, you could be an EP, or maybe, do some voiceover. And she said, sure. And so I went home and I said to my wife, I had 3 kids at the time. I said, I know this sounds crazy, but I want to quit my job. I want to downsize our entire lives, and I want to go for it, expecting her to just blow this out of the water. And she was like, yeah, of course. And I said, are you sure? And she said, well, how are you going to tell your kids to chase their dreams if you never chase yours? So let's try it. And that was 15 years ago. So I've been doing it ever since.
And do you think for a lot of people, I think it just takes that one person to kind of say you can do it. Because we're always told usually by our parents, oh, you need to be a doctor, a lawyer, or something else. Do you think just that one little thing of you can do it really you in focus to kind of move forward?
Yeah, I just thought, when am I ever going to have this chance again where so many people are supportive of this? And I knew it was what I wanted to do. And every day since that day, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And, we sacrificed a lot to be able to make that happen, especially really early on. We sacrificed a lot. But, I think you start recalibrating what success means, right? You start thinking about it am I doing what I love? Am I making, the art that I love? And am I chasing the stories that I love? And I think that really becomes the focus. And suddenly all of those other monikers that you've had that mark success in your life are irrelevant. So I do think it was that. I think it was that point where you just feel like enough other people think you can do it that you just take the leap.
And how did that first documentary start? Did you end up raising money? Did you kind of do it yourself? How did that work?
That's got a crazy story too. So at first I had a guy that, it's hard to sell your first project, right? A lot of people don't want to get involved because they're not sure that you can do it. And so I had one guy that told me that he would give me $50,000 and I could start. And so I started, and I had a crew. I had 2 crews, one in Charlotte, North Carolina, and one in LA. And we were going to kind of crisscross across the country and profiling America's homeless. And then we're going to meet up and see, how it was different from area to area, or was it different, or just look for the most amazing story. And so we got started, and about, 3 or 4 days in, I get a call from the guy who's supposed to put up the money, who hadn't put it up yet. And he says, hey, my wife just filed for divorce. You're probably going to get a call from her attorney, and I'm not going to be able to put up the money. And now I got these crews out like on the road, and I'm sweating and, like nervous. And my wife is like, everything going okay? And I'm like, yeah, honey, everything's fine. Everything's fine, and I was putting everything on my credit cards, just hoping that I could, figure out like, how am I going to get this thing over the finish line? And strangely, I walked into a coffee shop, a Panera Bread where I lived, and I must have shown it on my face. And this guy's that I've met twice in my life says, are you okay? And I said, man, I'm really stressed out. And I told him what had happened. And he was like, well, I think everything's going to be fine, which was horrible at the time. Like, who cares what you think? Like, it's not fine. And the next day he wired $50,000 into my bank account and said, I've been saving this money. I didn't know what it was for, but I think this is the right thing. So make a movie. And that's how it got. I mean, it was just that crazy.
The guy at Panera Bread sent you $50,000?
I'm sorry. Yeah. The guy I'd met twice in my whole life. And his last name is Cash. So
he worked there, or he was just like a guy that was?
No, he was just a guy that so we had kind of crossed paths. He had worked at someplace where I had worked, but he had left because he had a heart attack. And so I was moving into his office, but had never met him, but had called his wife and said, hey, I'm happy to move his stuff if he wants me to, or however I can help. And he was really struck by the generosity of me just offering to help him move. And so when we did finally meet, we had a couple of conversations, and then I ran into him after I had left that world, and it was quite crazy. The whole, when I look back at the whole story, I'm just so taken by, I don't believe that I did it, but at the time it just seemed like it made sense. I don't know how to describe it, but it was quite a wild ride.
And so once you finish that kind of film, what do you kind of do with it? Because I mean, most documentaries I hear don't get distribution or don't make any money. So kind of what happened at the end of that process for you?
Yeah. So, I, the typical process, I tried to go, to festivals, and I started getting picked up at festivals. But what really kind of gave it a lot of legs is I got asked to speak to Congress about the issue of homelessness, because I had no political affiliation with, with the issue. And quite frankly, I wasn't telling it, asking for money or asking for anything. I just had, 500 hours of interviews with America's homeless. And so, twice I spoke to the issue about the issue to Congress on Capitol Hill. And then it really picked up momentum and started kind of going out. And then it was, it was used by the National Coalition for the Homeless to kick off Hunger and Homeless Awareness Week after that. And still now, that film came out in 2012, I guess. And, it's on like one of those platforms, like a Film Hub or something, where it gets distributed to all the streamers. And I still get these amazing checks that come in from people watching that film, which it's kind of surreal that it's lasted so long. So it had a really great festival run.
Okay, gotcha. And then how does your career go after this? Like, what do you kind of move into?
Yeah. In the midst of that, before the film was even done, I had met this woman at an event where I lived, again, quite by chance, who told me this story. She was there. It was for nonprofits, but it was a hosted dinner, and we had volunteered, and so we were invited. And she was telling me in Nepal, when a parent is sentenced to prison and they don't have a guardian for their kids go to prison with them. And so she, at 21, started legally adopting these kids out of prison and raising them herself, hundreds of kids. And so I was like, oh my God, we gotta do this. And so I went back to some of the same people, and I got some money together, and I flew to Nepal, and we started shooting a film called Waiting for Mamu, and that did really well. She went on to win the CNN Hero of the Year and then CNN Hero of the Decade, and the film did exceptionally well. And then, then little by little, it became a little easier to get funding, and you were starting to get phone calls about, hey, what about this? What about that? What if we could put up some of the money, or, and then I was, which I never kind of thought of myself as a speaker, but I started doing some speaking engagements to talk about these issues, because kind of from my perspective of where I came from. And yeah, it was kind of off to the races after that. So we did some commercials and we just kept going. And now hopefully this summer I'll shoot my first narrative feature, and which we have cast that's attached. Susan Sarandon, who's been a lifelong friend since the very first doc. Since that first doc, she's been a friend, and in my corner for all of it. And you'll see if you pull up a lot of my movies, she's EP on a lot of the films, and William H. Macy. So we're hoping, fingers crossed, that gets shot this late this summer and comes out in 2025.
Gotcha. And what's that project kind of about?
Well, strangely enough, it's about a couple that she has a phobia that keeps her from going inside. It's exacerbated by the fact that she has a brain tumor. And so as they move into their retirement, she lives in a tent behind their house because this phobia keeps her from going inside. And so they had all these plans to travel the world, which are now, they can't. And so they just decide they're going to travel the world with shopping carts. They start pushing shopping carts around to each location, and they sit and they eat outside a Chinese restaurant and pretend like they're in China. And what would it be like if we were in China right now, and so on and so forth. But eventually end up, because of a seizure she has, they end up in a homeless camp. And so, it's kind of a look at this is who's there, and this is what happens. So it's really a full circle from that first film that I made.
Gotcha. And how are you going to end up doing like distribution? And then are you raising funds, or how's that kind of working out for that project?
No. So there's a company called iGeneration that picked it up. They are the same company that did some YA stuff. They did the Kissing Booth. So they've got another film out, or another series out right now called My Life with the Walter Boys. And so they've talked to streamers, but we have some financing that we're kind of putting in place, just trying to figure out the deal structure. But I haven't had to be involved in any of that, which is quite nice, quite different, frankly.
And my last question would be like, what advice would you give to like a new filmmaker starting out? Like if you had $50,000 to make a film, what would you tell them to do?
I think the one thing that, and I say this with all due respect for people who went to film school, is I feel like because I didn't go to film school, ignorance was kind of my friend. Like I didn't know that that you shouldn't do this because nobody ever told me. And so I feel like, if you could have that same curiosity about filmmaking and say, okay, well, it's not that we're confined to $1,000, but we have $1,000. Like we have $1,000 to shoot something, right? And what assets do we have around? And then how do we build a story with the assets that we have right here? Or who do we know? And, I think it's just about like creating something, and you're your own worst critic. And I feel like if you can get something done and get it out there, and you can, kind of find your people, a group of people who you can do the same for them, and you can all work on each other's projects. Like that's the way it gets done. And I don't believe, there was a great, can't remember who did the speech, but it was at South by Southwest, and it was called, the cavalry isn't coming. This idea that it's not going to you're not going to be sitting there, someone's going to knock on your door and offer you your dream job. Like you're going to have to go out and figure out how you create it. And once you are able to create all of this with your friends and start making better and better films, you become the cavalry for somebody else. I saw this great interview with Wes Anderson talking about when he made Bottle Rocket, and he literally got halfway through the script and they were out of money. So he stopped and then had to figure out, how do we put these parts together to make this into a short, before they had the money to shoot the feature. And I just think just figure out what you have and figure out what you can make out of what you have. And I think it requires a lot more creativity when you have smaller budgets. I think people with bigger budgets don't mean better films. A lot of times it just means more shiny equipment. But I think great storytelling can be told on, with using an iPhone or using some other technology, great acting, or just a great and interesting perspective, how you want to tell it.